Hello, everyone. My story began with this. Do you even hear yourself? I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and anger. My wife, seated across from me at the dinner table, looked up, startled by my tone. I had just teased her about how much she talked about Mark, a co-worker whose name had become a regular fixture in her stories. Her response, unexpected, casual, and deeply unsettling, left me breathless. I consider him more than just a friend, she'd said, the words slipping out so effortlessly, as if they were meant to be harmless. I froze. What does that mean? Oh, nothing. She laughed awkwardly, her eyes darting away. He's like a brother to me. The word sounded wrong, forced, like an afterthought meant to cover up something more troubling. I wanted to push further, but she quickly shifted the conversation, her tone light and dismissive. Still, those words lingered in the air like smoke after a fire, choking me with doubt. It wasn't always this way. For 8 years, we had built what I believed to be a rock-solid foundation, one rooted in love, trust, and shared dreams. We weren't perfect, of course, but we worked well together, balancing each other out. When she got the call about her new job, I saw it as the start of a bright chapter in our lives. She was thrilled. Her enthusiasm was contagious. "You've got this," I had told her, holding her close the night before her first day. "You're going to shine." And she did. She thrived in her role, her energy electric as she talked about the project she was leading and the challenges she was tackling. I couldn't have been prouder, stepping up at home to give her the time and space to focus on her career. I handled more of the cooking, cleaning, and errands. I didn't mind. Seeing her happy was worth it. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Subtle at first, like her coming home later than usual or being preoccupied during dinner. She stopped asking about my day as often, her attention elsewhere even when we were together. Her phone became a near-constant presence, buzzing with notifications from work chats. I didn't think much of it until I noticed her laughing at her screen late into the evening, long after I'd gone to bed. Mark's name first came up about 3 months into her new role. Mark said the funniest thing today. She had mentioned casually over breakfast, smiling into her coffee cup. I barely registered the name at the time. It seemed harmless, a colleague who brought some humor into her demanding workdays. But as the weeks went on, Mark became a recurring character in her stories. "Mark really saved the day during that meeting," she'd say. "Mark recommended this great Thai place. We should try it. Mark says I'm the only one who can pull off this crazy project. Isn't that sweet?" Her tone when she talked about him was different, lighter, almost glowing. At first, I was happy for her. Work friendships were important, especially in such a high-stress environment. But the frequency with which she mentioned him, coupled with the way her face lit up, began to gnaw at me. One evening, I couldn't help myself. "Sounds like you're quite fond of Mark," I said, aiming for playful, but unable to keep the edge out of my voice. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she shrugged and said, "I consider him more than just a friend." "What does that mean?" Her response was a nervous laugh, her gaze flickering away. "Oh, nothing. He's like a brother to me." The seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, it began to grow. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way her phone was always face down on the table. How she'd take calls in the other room. Her voice hushed but light, filled with a warmth I hadn't heard in a while. One night, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. The clock read 1:17 a.m. Confused, I got up and found her in the living room, her laptop open and her phone in hand. She startled when she saw me. "Couldn't sleep," she said quickly, closing her laptop. Her explanation didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I wanted to trust her. I had to. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Our conversations became shorter, more stilted. She stopped initiating plans for date nights or weekend outings, claiming exhaustion from work. When I suggested we take a short trip to reconnect, she hesitated. Things are crazy at the office right now, she said, her voice apologetic but firm. Maybe in a few months? One Friday evening, as we sat on the couch, I tried to breach the growing gap between us. You've been so busy lately. I feel like we haven't had time for us. She sighed, setting her phone down. I know. I'm sorry. Work's just a lot right now. It's not just work, though, is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might open up. But then she shook her head. I don't know what you mean. I didn't push further, but I knew. I could feel it in my bones. Something was slipping away from us, something I didn't know how to hold on to anymore. The laughter we used to share had been replaced by awkward silences. The closeness we once had felt like a distant memory. And Mark had become a shadow in our marriage, his presence growing stronger even in his absence. I didn't know how to name what I was feeling, but deep down, I understood. The life we had built over 8 years was beginning to crack, and I was terrified of what lay on the other side of those fractures. When her office announced a lakeside picnic for employees and their families, I saw it as a golden opportunity, a chance to reconnect, to spend time together away from the demands of her job. A neutral ground where we could shake off the weight of the past few months and rediscover the easy rhythm we once shared. The day was stunning, with sunlight glittering on the water like scattered diamonds, and the air alive with laughter. Children chased each other across the sprawling fields, their giggles harmonizing with the sizzle of burgers on the grill. Picnic tables were laden with colorful dishes, their bright hues mirroring the joy of the day. I tried to immerse myself in the moment, determined to make this outing a positive turning point for us. But it didn't take long for my optimism to falter. From the moment we arrived, I couldn't ignore how her gaze kept drifting toward Mark. He was hard to miss, tall, confident, the kind of man who commanded attention effortlessly. Their interactions were light and easy, marked by inside jokes and shared smiles. She laughed with him in a way I hadn't seen her laugh in months, her whole demeanor shifting when he was near. I stayed on the fringes, watching as they moved closer, their conversation flowing seamlessly. My rational mind tried to assure me it was nothing more than a friendship, but the knot in my stomach told a different story. The way her body leaned toward him, the casual touch on his arm, each small gesture felt like a blow. I tried to focus on the other guests, chatting politely with their colleagues and making small talk with their spouses. But no matter where I turned, my eyes kept being drawn back to them. It felt like they were in their own world, oblivious to the people around them, or to me. Later in the afternoon, a group of husbands invited me to join them for a fishing trip at the lake. I wasn't much of a fisherman, but the thought of stepping away for a while felt like a reprieve. Maybe the water would soothe the unease that had been clawing at me all day. We pushed off in a small rowboat, the calm surface of the lake reflecting the cloudless sky above. But as the minutes stretched into an hour with no bites, frustration set in. My mind wasn't on fishing, it was on her. I wondered if she had noticed my absence, if she was waiting for me to come back, so we could spend the rest of the day together. When we finally gave up, I decided to head back early. I told myself it was a spontaneous gesture, a surprise that would make her smile. As I approached the picnic area, I scanned the crowd for her familiar figure, my heart lifting slightly at the thought of seeing her. But she wasn't there. A colleague of hers noticed my confusion. "Oh, she went for a walk," he said casually. "With Mark." They headed toward the meadow. The words hit me like a physical blow. The knot in my stomach tightened into a hard, cold lump. My mind raced, jumping between explanations. Maybe they were discussing work. Maybe they were planning a team event. But deep down, I knew better. I followed the trail toward the meadow, my pulse quickening with each step. The sunlight seemed harsher now, the cheerful buzz of the picnic fading into the background as the sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears. As the path curved, a cluster of tall bushes came into view, their dense greenery partially shielding what lay beyond. Then I heard it, soft laughter, muffled voices. My steps faltered, my body moving forward even as my mind screamed for me to stop. I approached slowly, each step heavy with dread, until I reached the bushes. I pushed aside the branches, and time seemed to slow. There they were, tangled together, their clothes discarded carelessly on the grass. Her hand was on his face, his arms wrapped around her, their intimacy undeniable. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a scene so raw, so brazen, that it shattered every denial I had been clinging to. What the hell is this? The words ripped from my throat, a mixture of rage, shock, and devastation. They scrambled apart, her face a mask of panic as she grabbed for her clothes. Mark stammered an apology, his voice barely audible over the roaring in my ears. He backed away, muttering something about how sorry he was before turning and fleeing down the trail. I didn't stop him. My focus was entirely on her. She stood there, clutching her shirt to her chest, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice trembling. The sheer absurdity of her words made my blood boil. "Not what it looks like?" I snapped, my voice raw. "Then tell me, what exactly am I looking at?" Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She looked away, her shoulders shaking as she began to cry. For a moment, I wanted to comfort her, to reach out and stop her tears. But then the image of them together flashed in my mind, and the anger surged again, pushing any sympathy aside. "How long?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" Her silence was answer enough. I turned away, unable to look at her. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting the meadow in golden light. It was beautiful, breathtaking, even, but it felt like a cruel joke. How could the world look so perfect when everything I knew was falling apart? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my back to her, as I tried to gather my thoughts. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, and beneath it all, a deep, aching sadness. Finally, I turned back to her. "We're done here," I said, my voice cold and steady. Without waiting for a response, I walked away, leaving her standing there in the fading light. As I made my way back to the picnic area, the sound of her sobs followed me, but I didn't look back. The walk back to the picnic area was a blur, my legs moving mechanically, my mind reeling with what I'd just witnessed. Her betrayal was etched into my memory. Every detail, every motion, every word she had spoken. I couldn't decide if I wanted to scream or collapse. By the time we reached the car, the weight of the silence between us was suffocating. She sat in the passenger seat, clutching her shirt tightly to her chest, her face streaked with tears. I couldn't bring myself to start the engine. The rage boiling inside me demanded answers, but the heartbreak held me frozen. "How long has this been going on?" I asked finally, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and pain. She looked at me, her lips trembling. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words ignited something in me, a raw fury that bubbled over before I could stop it. "Don't insult me," I snapped. "It is exactly what it looks like." "How long?" Her sobs grew louder, and I could see her struggling to find the words. I thought she might deny it again, offer another excuse, but what she said next stopped me cold. "It's not just him," she blurted out, her voice breaking. I stared at her, stunned. "What are you saying?" She took a deep, shuddering breath, her gaze fixed on her lap. "It's not just Mark. There have been others," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Since I started at the company, I don't even know how it got to this point." Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced to process her words, each one cutting deeper than the last. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she continued, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "It wasn't about you. It was never about you. I felt trapped. Our life, our routine, it felt suffocating. And when I started at the new job, everything was so exciting, so new. I got caught up in it, and I made terrible choices. You were looking for a thrill? I spat, my voice dripping with disbelief and anger. And you decided to find it this way? By destroying everything we built. She flinched at my words, her tears flowing freely now. I didn't think it would go this far, she whispered. At first, it was just attention, harmless, I thought. But then it became something else. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Her guilt was evident in every trembling word, but it did nothing to temper the storm inside me. I couldn't look at her. The woman sitting beside me, the woman I had loved and trusted for 8 years, felt like a stranger. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, as I tried to collect my thoughts. Every memory of our life together flashed before my eyes. Our wedding day, the vacations, the quiet nights spent laughing on the couch. And now, all of it was tainted by her betrayal. Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy? I asked finally, my voice quieter now, but no less strained. Why didn't you talk to me instead of this? She shook her head, her face crumpling with regret. I didn't know how, she admitted. I was scared of what you'd think, scared of what it would mean for us. And then, the longer it went on, the harder it became to stop. Her words felt like a cruel irony. She had been scared of facing the truth. And now here we were, sitting in the wreckage of everything we had built together. I turned to look at her, forcing myself to meet her tear-filled eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. To me? To us? Her gaze dropped again, and she nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry. The drive home was excruciating. The car was silent except for her occasional sniffles. I kept my eyes on the road, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. How had I missed this? Were there signs I hadn't seen? And most painfully, was any of this my fault? When we got home, I walked inside without waiting for her, the door clicking shut behind me. I needed space, time to think, to process everything that had just unraveled. But she followed me, her voice trembling as she called my name. Please, she said, standing in the doorway of our bedroom as I sat on the edge of the bed. Let me explain. What's left to explain? I asked, my voice hollow. You've made your choices. You've said it all. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she said softly. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. But please believe me when I say, I didn't want to lose you. Her words felt like a cruel joke. Didn't want to lose me? I repeated, shaking my head. You lost me the moment you decided that harmless attention was worth more than the life we built together. She crumpled at my words, sinking to her knees in front of me. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know why I let this happen. All I know is that I love you, and I hate myself for what I've done. For a moment, I felt the smallest pang of pity. She was broken in her own way, trapped in the mess she had created. But that pity was overshadowed by the pain she had inflicted on me, on us. I stood and walked past her, my heart heavy. I need space, I said, my voice firm but tired. I can't even look at you right now. She didn't try to stop me as I left the room. In the silence that followed, I felt the full weight of what had happened. Our marriage, the life we had built, the trust we had shared. It was all gone, reduced to ash by her choices. And yet, deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The confrontation was over, but the battle within me had just begun. We sat there in silence after her confession, the room heavy with the weight of unspoken words. It felt like time had stopped. Outside, life continued as if nothing had changed. The faint hum of a car passing by, the distant laughter of children playing. But for me, everything was different. My world had shifted, and I was left stranded, trying to make sense of the wreckage. The anger that had burned so fiercely in me earlier was now a faint ember. In its place was a hollow sadness that seemed to spread through every part of me. I stared at the floor, my mind racing with questions that had no easy answers. Was it my fault? Did I miss the signs? Could I have done something, anything, to prevent this? Asterisk, asterisk. I replayed every moment of our marriage, looking for clues, for signs of her unhappiness that I might have ignored. There were flashes of arguments, busy schedules, and the inevitable lulls that come with being together for years. But betrayal? I couldn't pinpoint the moment when our marriage had started unraveling, and that uncertainty only deepened my sadness. In the days that followed, I found myself cycling through waves of emotions, each one more overwhelming than the last. Anger would strike like a lightning bolt, quick and furious. I would think about her laughter with Mark, the casual way she had spoken his name, and feel a rage so consuming I would have to leave the room just to breathe. I punched pillows, slammed doors, and even threw an empty glass across the kitchen once, watching it shatter against the tile. But just as quickly as the anger came, it would dissolve, leaving me drowning in sadness. I grieved not just for the betrayal, but for the life I thought we had. I mourned the small, everyday moments, making breakfast together on lazy Sundays, her head resting on my shoulder during movie nights, the quiet comfort of knowing she was there. Each memory felt like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. And then there was the guilt. It crept in during the quiet moments, whispering insidious questions. Had I worked too much? Been too distracted? Had I failed to make her feel loved or appreciated? Was this my fault? Asterisk, asterisk. Nights were the hardest. The silence of the house felt oppressive, the empty side of the bed a stark reminder of everything that had changed. Sleep was elusive, and when it came, it brought with it dreams that left me waking up feeling worse. In one, we were happy again, laughing and holding hands like nothing had happened. In another, I watched her walk away with Mark, her back to me, never once looking back. During the day, I threw myself into distractions, work, errands, even mundane chores like cleaning the garage. Anything to keep my mind occupied. But no matter what I did, the memories and questions were always there, lurking in the corners of my mind. Eventually, I decided to seek help. A close friend, who had noticed my withdrawn behavior, gently suggested I talk to someone. At first, I resisted. Therapy felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that I couldn't handle this on my own. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed an outlet, a space to untangle the mess of emotions I was carrying. In my first session, the therapist asked me to talk about the day I discovered the affair. As I recounted the events, the words spilled out of me in a rush. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. It felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary. Over time, therapy helped me gain perspective. One of the hardest truths I had to confront was that her choices were hers alone. This wasn't about my failures or shortcomings as a husband. She had made her decisions, and they were rooted in her own inability to confront her unhappiness. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it began to shift it. Slowly, I stopped blaming myself. The guilt that had weighed me down started to lift, and in its place, I felt a faint sense of clarity. Acceptance didn't come all at once. It was a slow, uneven process, like climbing a mountain where every step forward feels hard-earned. Some days were easier than others. I found comfort in small victories, getting through a full day without crying, enjoying a walk in the park, rediscovering a hobby I had once loved. Other days were harder. I would see something that reminded me of her, a book she had loved, a song we used to sing along to in the car, and the sadness would crash over me like a wave. But each time, I managed to stand back up a little stronger than before. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rediscover myself outside of our marriage. For so long, I had defined myself as her husband, as part of a team. Now, I was learning who I was on my own. I reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym, and even took up photography, a passion I hadn't explored in years. There were moments of joy, small but meaningful. The first time I laughed at a joke without feeling guilty. The first time I woke up and didn't immediately think about her. These moments reminded me that healing was possible, even if it was slow. One evening, as I stood on a hill watching the sunset through my camera lens, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long time, I felt grateful for the beauty of the world, for the resilience I had found within myself, and for the hope that things would get better. Looking back, I realized that the journey through heartbreak is not a straight path. It's messy, painful, and often feels never-ending. But it's also transformative. Her betrayal broke me, but it also forced me to grow in ways I never thought possible. The anger had faded, the sadness had lessened, and in their place was a quiet acceptance. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take that step. In the days that followed, we barely spoke. The house felt like a ghost of what it had once been, each room holding echoes of a life that no longer felt real. I couldn't look at her without seeing the betrayal, without hearing her confession play on a loop in my mind. Eventually, we had the conversation we both knew was coming. "This isn't fixable," I said one evening, my voice steady but tired. "There's too much broken between us." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." Her apology didn't change anything, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. I didn't hate her, not anymore. I pitied her, and in some small way, I felt sorry for the pain she was clearly carrying. But I knew that whatever love we once had was gone, buried under the weight of her choices. We agreed to separate, and she moved out a few weeks later. Watching her pack her things was surreal, a final reminder that our chapter together had come to an end. When she closed the door behind her for the last time, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. The house, once filled with the sounds of shared laughter and conversation, was now eerily quiet. At first, the silence was unbearable. I kept the TV on constantly just to fill the void, but it did little to ease the ache in my chest. Therapy became a lifeline. Each session was a safe space to untangle the web of emotions I was caught in: anger, sadness, guilt, confusion. My therapist helped me see the situation more clearly, stripping away the layers of blame and self-doubt I had wrapped myself in. One of the most valuable lessons I learned was this: her actions were not a reflection of my worth. They were her choices, rooted in her own unhappiness and insecurities. Friends and family played an equally important role in my healing. At first, I was reluctant to open up, afraid of being judged or pitted. But the people who truly cared for me showed nothing but support and understanding. They reminded me of my worth when I struggled to see it myself. And slowly, their words began to sink in. Rebuilding my life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I started with small steps, reorganizing the house, getting rid of things that reminded me too much of her. It was cathartic, a way of reclaiming the space as my own. I began rediscovering hobbies I had neglected during our marriage. Photography, hiking, even cooking, all things that had once brought me joy but had been pushed aside in the chaos of our relationship. There were setbacks, of course. Some days, the weight of everything would hit me all over again, and I'd find myself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to move. On those days, I reminded myself that healing isn't linear. It's messy and unpredictable, but it's still progress. Over time, the anger and sadness began to fade. They didn't disappear entirely. I don't think they ever truly will, but they stopped defining me. I started to feel lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Looking back now, I see the betrayal for what it was: a painful but valuable lesson. It forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself and our relationship. I learned to prioritize open communication, to pay attention to warning signs, and to trust my instincts. Most importantly, I learned the value of self-worth and the importance of setting boundaries. Her actions were a reflection of her own struggles, not of my inadequacy as a partner. Understanding that was liberating. It allowed me to let go of the guilt and move forward with a clearer sense of who I am and what I deserve. To anyone walking a similar path, my advice is this: don't ignore the cracks if something feels wrong. Trust yourself enough to confront it. It's better to face uncomfortable truths than to live in denial. But if the trust is broken beyond repair, don't be afraid to walk away. Healing takes time, more time than you might think. There will be days when it feels impossible, when the pain feels too heavy to carry. But it does get better. Slowly, the pain fades, and in its place comes strength, clarity, and hope. As for me, I'm still healing, but I'm no longer defined by what happened. I'm rediscovering joy, rebuilding my life, and finding peace in the small moments. And for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. I don't know what lies ahead, but I do know this: I am stronger now. And that strength, hard-won and deeply earned, will carry me forward. What's one piece of advice or insight you've gained from overcoming a challenging experience in your own life? Let's share and support each other in the comments.